Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event hosted by the Development and Alumni Department. Just a bit of a forewarning. The students here will know that we're in exam season, and this is one of the venues that's actually used most extensively for many of our examinations. So I want you to know that actually after our presentation, we are going to have an exam to test your comprehension of the presentation. So please pay attention. So this is part of a series of talks that the Alumni Department organizes on a fairly regular basis as an opportunity to reach out to our alumni and also to give them an opportunity to reconnect with their alma mater. And we always try to have very interesting topics and interesting speakers so that we can have a real good discussion, good engagement. And I think today we are in for a real treat and appropriate that it's called a distinguished speaker series, because our speaker today is eminently distinguished and especially so young. I mean, we were sort of chatting early when I came, and she was sort of bemoaning the fact that it was such a long time since she had been at the university. And I asked her, well, what do you mean such a long time that you've been at the university? She said, oh, a whole 11 years. And I said, that's sort of typical of millennials, you know, that 10, 11 years seems like a lifetime. I didn't tell her that I actually was here at the university. I started in 1977. So if you think that 11 years is a long time, and I actually left here in 1981. And I'm sure there are others who go even further back. But it's going to be the pleasure of our head of alumni relations, Libo, to introduce our speaker to you today. And I know that at the end of her presentation, Rapelang's presentation, there will be an opportunity for discussion and questions. And I really hope that you have a good afternoon with us. And I want to thank you again for coming out and spending this time with us. So, Libo.
First of all, we're so delighted to see so many people come out on a Saturday afternoon. It's not easy, especially during winter. So particularly the students, thank you very much for coming out. My job is really easy. I mean, to introduce Rapelang Rabana is, you know, what can we say? An entrepreneur, a thought leader in the tech industry. Rapelang was recently honored by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. That was in 2017. She was also featured on the cover of Forbes Africa by the age of 30. So I think for students, this is probably something to aim for. She was a founding member of the company called Jaeger Communications, one of the first voice over internet applications. And her latest project, called Rekindle Learning, has been profiled as a striking innovation in mobile learning for both academic and corporate training environments. She's passionate about education. Her accomplishments are extensive. It gives me great pleasure this afternoon to introduce and to welcome Rapelang Rabana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the UCT alumni team for inviting me here. I don't often get to speak at UCT. It's one of those funny things. Other institutions want to hear more from you than your own, so I'm glad that's changing. I will say a lot about my journey with you today, from the time I sort of started and give you a little bit of my perspective around innovation and entrepreneurship. And you'll find that it's probably going to be a bit different from what you might have heard about before. So let me just start from the beginning of my journey. As you know, I'm a UCT graduate. I finished in 2005 with a computer science, business science, computer science degree, which I landed in quite by accident, really. I had no idea what I wanted to study coming out of matric, and since my parents refused for me to take a gap year, I asked my brother, what can I do? Mom and dad said I have to go and study, and he picked this degree, largely as a malicious joke, and it was quite terrifying to see code on the wall that first day, and tried a lot to change and look at other degree options, but in the end I actually stuck with computer science because I realized that outside of accounting and marketing and all the other stuff in the commerce faculty and auditing and all of those things, it was the only subject that actually allowed you to create stuff out of your imagination, and you could literally inject ideas into reality, and it seemed like a worthwhile pursuit. So pushed through some of those toughest 4 years, and by some miracle, less than 8 years later, I was featured on the cover of Forbes, as mentioned, alongside Wendy Ackerman as a sort of the symbol of this next generation of young aspirant African entrepreneurs that are trying to sort of make their mark. And I was also given a few amazing accolades by the World Economic Forum, including being a young global leader for this year. The sort of claim to fame, or the beginning of my journey, was right after UCT. A couple of friends of mine and I decided that we were desperate not to get jobs, and we needed to come up with a plan so that our parents don't kill us. And that plan was to start a business. And having been students, we never really had much airtime or credit to make calls and things. We would always use please call me's to communicate because we never had credit. And I remember one please call me might have meant we're meeting at 5 o'clock, or 2 means that meeting's been changed to 6 o'clock. And we thought there was a different world that could emerge if we could capture the power of internet connectivity on mobile phones. So you need to remember that this is before the time of Android, before the time of iPhone. This is 2005, we're in our honors year. The smartest phones you had was your Windows Mobile and your Nokia E-series and N-series devices. This was a different time. It was ugly technology-wise, but that's where we were. And that's when we started developing mobile web applications, essentially. So it was predecessors to what we now know as WhatsApp and Viber calls that seem so easy peasy and prevalent. So we were incredibly early, but that's what launched our career. This is what we looked like when we first started. We all lost quite a lot of weight from the stress of the startup. And what's always amazing for me is that when I think back that a group of UCT students with no real social or financial capital could get a few cheap laptops, some cheap internet, and sit in a little apartment and prototype technology that was world-class is, to me, what the power of the internet is, and that's democratizing, leveling power of it, that we could do that because we taught ourselves everything, literally one Google search at a time. We Googled our way to success. We taught ourselves how to build the software, how to run a business online. A lot of the time, the conversations around who has mentors and we want this and that, we taught ourselves everything online. I think I had a real mentor 3 or 4 years into the business. To me, you can become an expert on almost anything on the internet today if you decide to actually build an expertise in it. So that was the beginning, and Diego, we eventually launched it after sort of 9 months of prototyping. So we graduated 2005, and we prototyped from January to September. We had a product that sort of worked half of the time, which was pretty good, considering most of the computer science people we chatted to said it was going to be impossible. So it was a great feat, and my role at the time in the business was really more everything that was not R&D, since I knew I wasn't a great coder. So that involved operations, investor relations, and I was spend most of my time looking for money, and chatted to all of the banks, the government organizations, and everyone was really excited. This cool group of students doing all this amazing stuff, and it's sweet and it's cute, but no one really wants to give you money. And eventually kind of gave up on that and rather try to build relationships with people that were in the industry. And what was pretty amazing is that after a while, when you've engaged and built that relationship, when you've shown that you follow up on emails, you respond, you come back to their calls, you answer their questions, that you've progressed from month 1 to 2 and 3 and you've made these improvements, people start opening up to you much more. They open their trust networks to you, and eventually through a number of introductions, we met the people that will become our first angel investors in September of 2006. And what's interesting for me is that I met them, I tried to trace back the chain of introductions, and it actually came through the fact that I was part of the organizing committee for Young Women in Finance, a conference that was done through Investstock at the time. I think they call it Young Women Professionals now, I'm not entirely sure. But one of the mothers who was one of the mothers of the organizers had been part of the events and things, and she had said, you know, talk to this lady, she works at Vodacom, or used to work at Vodacom, maybe, you know, talk to her, she might be able to help you. And that had led to this string of introductions. So to me, it just shows that it's really critical at your time in university to be engaged and to get exposure. And this group of people sitting here are your social capital, and it's not some person in a magazine out there. And that's what's really, really important. And if you're showing your best self to these very people here, these are the people that will help you. And it wasn't some other sort of foreign or far off business person or mentor that was going to make the biggest difference. And so we had an amazing journey. We managed to launch Yego.com in 2006 with our first bit of sort of angel investment that we had. And we launched it like a Skype.com type version initially. You would download the app onto your phone and you'd be able to buy credit, or like Skype out credit, Yego out credit, to be able to make calls. But because it was 2006, most people didn't really buy credit on their phones using a credit card at the time. So it became unsustainable quite quickly. And these thousands of users were coming in but not paying us sort of a cent. And not being in Silicon Valley and not having been able to raise the amount of funding that our Israeli and British counterparts had of, you know, $30 million, 20 million pounds or so they'd raised, we needed to make a shift. And we were quickly sort of running out of money. And the shift that we decided that we'd have to make is that given that we can't collect money from consumers, the best market to try and collect money from would be businesses, because at least they can pay you via EFTs and things, and that's pretty normal for them. And 2, in those business environments, you can better control the internet infrastructure. 3G was still very unpredictable, so the quality of calls wasn't great. So WhatsApp really has sort of timed it much better. They waited for the connectivity quality to improve, whereas we were pretty far too sort of early. Anyway, so in that search, Telfree, one of the other VoIP operators that came up in South Africa post deregulation in the telecoms industry in 2005, bought a majority stake in Yego in 2009. And that allowed us to morph and focus in on the SME market, which was what their focus had been. So had another good sort of 4 years there, building a very cool enterprise type products. And all in all, sort of 7-8 years of an amazing journey compared to what I think most entrepreneurs experience in general. But that said, it sort of came to a point where you realize, you know, you're no longer in control of the business, and telecoms wasn't all that fun. You wanted to do more software stuff, but now we're getting pulled more into a telecoms environment. And that kind of stage where you realize you need sort of something else. And that, for me, that's something else I'd always been wanting to explore more, was really learning technologies that we couldn't sort of find the space for. And I felt I've taken what I can from this journey. And then I started Rekindle Learning. So still in the sort of tech space, but now using technology or essentially trying to merge the best that we know about learning science and smart learning technologies to deliver better learning outcomes, so that we learn better, we build skills better, we assimilate knowledge faster. And the reason this is important for me is that, you know, I've had amazing opportunities through Yego to be on a lot of global platforms. And what has always frustrated me was how irrelevant Africa was in that conversation. And it's because we contribute so little to trade and global GDP and general global sort of economic prosperity that it's frustrating for me that we're a side issue, and I think what's the point of having children and making money for myself if we're going to continue to exist being a continent that is almost a side issue. And when I think about how do we evolve and take our place as an economic leader on a global stage, I think that there's two levers that can change the trajectory of a country's or continent's development, and that is education and skills, and the second is financial inclusion. So Kindle Learning is really my exploration around the education and skills element and how we can change how that happens so that we can change the trajectory of our development. And essentially, some of the things that we do is smart learning apps. One of the things that we've launched most recently for universities, or most relevant here, is an online sort of bridging program to improve your English proficiency skills. So a lot of learners, maybe not those sort of coming to UCT, but many come to tertiary level with sub-grade 12 English, which makes it very hard to assimilate and consume tertiary content and write at the level required. And when we look at all the issues around fees must fall, the language barrier is certainly one of the things I think is a prohibiting factor for many, many students. And even though they're supposed to have done sort of 12 years of English, it typically hasn't been at the level expected or required. So the tool itself has actually been around for about 12 years, and we bought it and revamped it quite significantly to align it with international standards. So there's a few thousand learners that go through it, more sort of universities of technologies and FET colleges and the like. So we're hoping to grow that quite significantly beyond South Africa as well. The other stuff that we're doing in corporate training environments, particularly to help young people improve their sort of chances in those environments, is that I'll give you an example. Particularly in financial services, there's a lot of compliance and regulatory related sort of certifications that one needs to get. And typically in company training environments, you're put in a room, you're given a 300-page manual, and everyone hopes for the best that you've mastered the content and life kind of moves on. And then people still fail the examinations and what have you. So what we do is that we take sort of those 300-page manuals that one would sort of statically read, and we repackage it into a concept called microlearning. So it's taking content into small bite-sized steps. Almost all the content becomes now question-based and interactive, and the system tracks the ones you get wrong and right and brings you back to the ones you get wrong more often than the ones you get right. So you end up focusing on your weak areas and that you keep learning until you demonstrate that you've actually mastered the content. So it's just a smarter way almost of having, I had one of those mums who would always ask me after school, look at my book where we were reading and ask me questions about what we did, and even my maths times tables and stuff like that. And because she knew me so well, she'd ask me the stuff I didn't know. And it's almost like having that person provide you that feedback loop and that test loop in a shorter, more consistent way than any human being can sort of do for you. And there's lots of data that shows that this kind of rapid reinforcement is one of the simplest ways to improve learning outcomes and things. So we've seen some great improvements, companies improving their pass rates by over 50% by just using the same methodology as opposed to just a face-to-face workshop. So that's what I'm trying to do with Rekindle, and there's lots and lots of other ideas that I hope to get there, but these are the starting blocks of some of the solutions that we're working on there. The other thing that I'm working on, I mentioned that the second lever in how we change how countries develop is sort of financial inclusion. And the aspect of financial inclusion that I feel most capable to make a contribution in is how we finance and grow businesses. So 12 years into being an entrepreneur, early stage funding is relatively still weak and non-existent on the continent, particularly for tech businesses. So instead of complaining for another 12 years, I decided to sit on the other side of that conversation, and I've joined Nisela Capital as a partner there to understand the investment side of the world, and that hopefully in a couple of years I might understand the mechanics and the models a lot better to be able to propose how one might de-risk and finance early stage tech businesses better. Have no idea what the answer is going to be, but that's the sort of aspiration and search in that direction, and what we're doing there. So I've given you a whole lot of spiel about the things that we're doing now, and 12 years on from the time I graduated from 2005, I often still look at it all myself and I wonder how it all came to be. because I know that I was never the smartest person in the room. UCT had a lot of very, very smart people, and I know that I was never the person with the greatest social or financial capital. So when I try to ask myself how this all sort of came about, and I try to figure out what's the purpose of my story or what's the relevance of my journey, I'm pulled to a couple of interesting factors, and that is that the way we understand how success and value is created in the world today is changing quite significantly. And it's no longer about having something that nobody else has, but increasingly it's about knowing who you are, knowing what you have, and working with that to your advantage. And essentially I'm saying that greater self-awareness has been key and probably quintessential to, I think, the success I've been able to achieve. So I'm saying that it's about tapping into your internal wisdom. And this is strange because a lot of the time in society, we spend a lot of time telling you to look out there for success, to look at people like me. But I believe that the ability to drive yourself to your full potential actually starts with a deeper self-understanding and a deeper personal mastery. And it's unfortunate that we don't often talk about those things that are not really subjects at universities and the like. But all I have ever tried to do was to follow the rhythm of my own soul, to pursue my own curiosities, and I had no idea that it would actually take me so far. So what I wanted to mention before I go into this more is that I found that my process of entrepreneurship and innovation started somewhere that was not very business-like. And often when we think about how we're going to drive economic growth and innovation in our economy, we start looking at government policies, at ecosystems, and what's in our environment and all of those things. And the reality, though, is that South Africa is actually not doing that bad. The Global Entrepreneurial Index that measures the possible barriers to entrepreneurship, including things like physical infrastructure, government policies, access to finance, entrepreneurial attitudes, and quality of education, it actually ranked South Africa 46 out of 85 countries in the world, and ahead of many, many African countries. So while there's always room for improvement, South Africa's entrepreneurial environment is technically not all that bad. But then at the same time, when you look at the research from GEM, between 2001 and 2016, South Africa continues to show very low economic activity, entrepreneurial activity, compared to those same African countries. So while we have a more entrepreneurial environment, our people are not more entrepreneurial. And the averages of the African regional average for entrepreneurial volition or willingness to start a business is 4 times higher than it is in South Africa. So when I try to think about what are the biggest issues really holding our country back, I don't think it's environmental or policy-based entirely. So I'm not going to talk about what smarter policies the government can do. There are certainly smarter things to do, but I don't think those are the things that are going to change things dramatically. I think that the biggest issues lie within our own mindsets. And today I want to give you a glimpse into my journey of how I think my mindset developed and how my journey of awareness had led me to this point in time. So I want to take you right back to the very beginning of my journey. And like I said, it started somewhere not very business-like or academic at all. I remember I was about 14 years old in high school, and I was in a geography class. It was not my favorite subject at all. And I was so bored. I was looking outside of the window, straight into the sun, trying to blind myself because I was so bored. So I must have been about 14 years old when I first asked myself the question, what the hell are you doing? And what is this life thing about? I kind of saw the rest of my life playing out. I had gone through this whole primary school process, got to the top of that primary school system, and now I was at the bottom of another system in high school, and I was required to work my way through that and finish that system, and then I was supposed to go to university and start at the bottom of another system, work my way through that, and then I was supposed to go into a job or corporate world, start at the bottom of that system, and then I was like, am I going to be playing systems sort of for the rest of my life? And when do I stop playing systems and when do I do me? So my journey to becoming an entrepreneur actually had very little with wanting or liking business or maths or finance or money or wanting to be a boss or wanting to tell people what to do or anything like that. It was much more of a mindset shift, a much more of an emotional journey of much greater sort of self-awareness. I started to notice what I call the facades that make up our world. Because kind of when you grow up, you get the sense that the way the world is and how it works is the way it's supposed to be. It's the way your parents designed it, the way your teachers designed it, and those structures are just kind of how the world is. And if you do what you're told, you're a nice person, you try hard, you mean well, you keep pushing, you'll get to this place in the system where you're happy and successful and you're fulfilled. And I kind of got that sneaky feeling that that probably isn't quite true, that it doesn't work out that way. It was kind of like my very own Matrix moment. I hope there's still people that watch The Matrix here. And in the movie The Matrix, Morpheus, the scary guy, gives Neo a choice that, you can take the blue pill if you want to forget these funny, unsettling, crazy questions that you have about life. Or you can take the red pill if you want to go on this journey and explore what these life questions are sort of about. For those of you who may not remember it perfectly, I'll give you a little snippet. So that splinter in my mind sort of drove me mad, maybe from the time I was having that conversation when I was 14 years old. And by the time I was, 6 months away from graduation, I was pretty sure that the adults hadn't figured out this life thing. And if I kept going along this system that was sort of supposedly going to dictate the rest of my life, I probably wouldn't come out very happy. So my decision to be an entrepreneur came from one simple and very, very powerful realization. And I realized that everyone, and absolutely everyone, is winging it. Everyone was still figuring out this life thing. Everyone was still taking their first shot at it, and no one had been to the end to come back to tell us how it kind of pans out. And I remember it was both a terrifying and liberating moment. It was terrifying because I was like, am I the last one in on this joke? But it was also liberating because I suddenly realized that I had no more excuses to not do what I really wanted to do. I remember having dinner with my parents, who are the pillars of my world. And as we were having that dinner, I realized they were winging it too. So I know that I wasn't the only one who had these crazy ideas. Steve Jobs had some similar thoughts too, about how our facades and how we see the world may not be all that accurate and may actually be the things that hold us back.
The thing I would say is, when you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. But life, that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader. Once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. And the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something that, if you push in, something will pop out the other side. You could change it, you could mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live it.
Everything around you that you call life was made up by people that are no smarter than you. So this questioning of the world and this striving to understand myself and how it works better was really where I think my journey began. And I know you're still wondering, how does this greater awareness lead to building a business, to being innovative? How does it build to creating value? So I'm going to explain how it all sort of links together now by showing you how this place of greater self-awareness is the beginning of critical business traits, like how to be more innovative, how to make bold decisions and take risks, how to create value. So let's look at the first one, how to be more innovative. So I think that the more self-aware you are, the more likely you are to end up doing things that you are genuinely connected to, things that you're genuinely interested in and have always been naturally drawn to, things that you're authentically connected to. And that authentic connection, I believe, is the thing that enables you to see deeper into an issue or a problem, is the thing that enables you to tap into solutions and gain aha moments that will ultimately deliver competitive business advantage. Often when I talk to people that are looking to start their own business or they're working on a project in their company and things like that, I listen a little bit to the business viability of their idea, but that's actually a small part of it. I listen mostly for their authentic connection to this idea. I ask myself, who are they? How have they come to this point? How have they lived? Where have they lived? What have they done? What have they been exposed to? What are the skills they've learned? What are the experiences they've had? What have been the defining moments of their life? I'm trying to understand how they came to this point in time in the universe where they are predisposed to this idea. Because that tells me, one, it tells me how deeply connected they are to that idea. It tells me if they will have the deeper insights and capacity for innovation to really see something that is new, that will be able to deliver a competitive advantage in the market. But it also tells me how committed they will be to that idea. It tells me whether it's simply an academic mental masturbation and they'll be bored with it in 12 months, or it's something that they're going to be able to direct their lives to for years to come. So often when we do entrepreneurial exercises, we tell people, sit in a room for an hour, come up with an idea, and we look for smart-sounding ideas that are intellectually interesting. But that is not an organic process that allows someone to tap into who they are and what they're prepared to commit their lives to, what they're prepared to take a position about and be convicted enough or have enough conviction to actually pursue and make happen. And I take an example and a quote from Paul Graham. He's a renowned investor and entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. And he says that if you look at the way successful founders have had their ideas, it is generally the result of an external stimulus hitting a prepared mind. And that prepared mind is that sum total of your life journey that has brought you to this point in time where you have had all of these experiences, seen the world from the angle you have seen it. That is your prepared mind. So if you're not tapping into things that you are uniquely predisposed to, you're not tapping into the sum total of your life journey and the competitive advantage that could give you. Paul Graham goes on to say that the verb you want to be using with respect to startup ideas is not think up, but notice. So it comes back to that exercise of awareness. And it's not about being intellectually or academically smart, but having a greater awareness. He gives us the example of Dropbox. Drew Houston, the founder of Dropbox, had forgotten his USB stick, like many of us forget USB sticks at home, and think, Drew Houston thinks, I need to make my files live online. And because he had been working with the kind of web technologies that would be required to build a Dropbox, that stimulus hit a prepared mind. His life journey had brought him to that point in time where he was predisposed to that idea. He goes on to say, Paul, that whoever you are, you have a sum total of life experiences that have prepared you to notice the opportunities around you. So tapping into your ability to think entrepreneurially, to be more innovative, starts with greater awareness and focusing on the things you notice, the things that irritate you, the things where you believe that life should be a certain way, instead of tossing them out as strange, disconnected ideas. In those fleeting moments, in those fleeting thoughts, those may well be the things that you're actually authentically connected to. So you see, your distinguishing factor in the world and in life is how you see the world. And being self-aware allows you to unearth what that viewpoint is as opposed to ignoring it or shutting it down because it's neither significant or important, or so you're told. Being more self-aware allows you to separate who you are from the circumstances around you so that you see those circumstances as changeable, as movable, as non-permanent. As Steve Jobs says, as things that you can poke and something will come out on the other side. Most people will live their lives not believing that those circumstances around them are changeable because they are so attached to them. They can't step back and raise their awareness to realize that it actually isn't their whole world. And this is why I'm saying this journey starts with awareness. This is not airy-fairy feel-good stuff. I believe this is the primary source of innovation and competitive advantage today. The best ideas are not going to come out from the Harvard Business Review. Certainly the ideas that are going to have an impact on your life are going to come from the things that you notice. So if you generally don't even acknowledge the validity and legitimacy of your own point of view, you are not going to be able to tap into those ideas. The second sort of business trait that I believe greater awareness gives you is the ability to make bold decisions or take risks, essentially. Coming out of UCT, I was able to decide that I was going to start this business with my classmates. And at the time, everyone thought it was crazy and so risky and sort of ridiculous. But at the time, for me, it actually felt like the only thing I could do. And this was because from that journey I had when I was 14 years old, I had made a clear commitment in my mind that I didn't want to play sort of these systems. And I wanted to be able to decide how I spent my time and what I gave my attention to. And it seemed by a process of elimination that starting a business was the only thing that was going to give me that. So I knew something that I'm going to call my non-negotiables. And something very powerful happens when you know your non-negotiables. Everything else, you're happy to be flexible on. Your ability and courage to test and push boundaries depends on how strongly anchored you are in your non-negotiables. I quote from Chris Loney, the author of Heroic Leadership. You liberate yourself for confident, even radical experimentation when you know your non-negotiables. In contrast, those who don't know their non-negotiable goals and values become loose cannons. They have plenty of firepower, but no clear target. Paralyzed by indecision at each fork in the road, they shun risk, tread only well-beaten paths, and fall short of their potential. When you are clear on your non-negotiables, everything else becomes negotiable and gives you enormous flexibility and capacity for risk-taking. So it's essentially saying that if you don't have an anchor in anything, you can't take risks on anything else. And I was raised with two brothers, and we always played rounders, kind of a version of baseball type thing. And it occurred to me that the person who wins is the one who's prepared to take the risk of running through the bases. But if you were really scared of being caught out, you would hold on to that first base or second base, even though the end goal is to do the whole sort of circle because you couldn't bear to lose it. And essentially what he's saying here is that if you don't know what your real end goal is, you will hold on to everything because you won't know what's important and what's not. And because you don't know what's important, you have to protect yourself by holding on to everything around you. And your ability to take risks depends on knowing what your non-negotiable is, that you're prepared to hold on to at all costs, and what the negotiables then become. So coming out of varsity, I was non-negotiable on the time and the tension and the system thing, but I was negotiable on how my career would go. I was negotiable on what kind of income I may or may not have in the short term. I was negotiable on not having a structure or a blue chip company behind my name because I was clear on what my non-negotiables were. He goes on to say that you must come to the table with a strong understanding of your non-negotiables, and that enables you to pounce instinctively on the opportunities that suit your real objectives. So if you think about companies like Steve Jobs or Apple, they were also quite clear on their non-negotiables to provide compelling experiences for users, and that allowed them to experiment on a whole range of other things. While most companies were tied to using Microsoft systems and whatever else, they're like, that's not the non-negotiable. We will experiment and change on everything else because we're very clear on what we want to achieve. So in the conversations I had, and this is not a once-off conversation, it's something I have with myself all the time. The question is, what are your non-negotiables as a person, as an organization that you might be part of? Because it's the lack of clarity on those non-negotiables that prevents you from making any bold decisions or taking any sort of risky decisions, because you will have to hold on to everything if you don't know what's actually important to you. And a lack of clarity is precisely what kind of holds you back. The third trait that being more aware gives you, and final one that I'll give you is, this is an equation I live by, that hard work and your unique contribution over time creates value that yields success. So most people believe that equation to some extent, or a lot, but most people also believe that other things play a critical or more persuasive or have a greater impact on that equation. Things like, what quality school you went to, how rich your parents were, did you go to UCT or not, are you white, are you black, are you female, are you a man, do you have a network of friends that can give you contracts and things like that. Those are all sort of influential factors, but I've known that they were never deciding factors at all. And I know that hard work alone is also not enough. If hard work alone was the deciding factor in success, then I believe that miners and domestic workers would be the wealthiest people in this country. The thing then is, it's not just enough to sort of do that hard work bit. It's also not enough to just be a good person and to try hard and to do your best and to do what you're told. If you think about it carefully, you can teach a dog to do those things. What then does it mean to be human? It means that you're required to live with intentionality. You're required to ask yourself continuously what that contribution is going to be and work towards it. The privilege of being human necessitates that you choose and that you reflect on that sort of unique contribution and what it's going to be. I know that many of you who, and certainly when I was young, I didn't know this, but I trusted my instincts and followed it all along, and I only know this for sure in retrospect, where there are many people who think, I don't know that I have a unique contribution, I don't think I do. And I want to give you a quote by Ben Horowitz, also an entrepreneur and investor, and he says that, as I got further into running my business, I realized that embracing the unusual parts of my background would be key to making it through. It would be those things that would give me unique perspectives and approaches to the business, the things that I would bring to the table that nobody else had. When I work with entrepreneurs today, this is the main thing that I try to convey. Embrace your weirdness, embrace your background, embrace your instinct. This is how much he believes that value comes from within. So that if you think back to the first point about the sum total of your life experiences, you're bringing your whole self to your life journey. Whether you're going to be an entrepreneur, whether you're in an organization, it actually doesn't actually matter. You still need to be bringing your whole self, your whole life journey to the table to bear, because that gives you your unique perspective. And if you're just going to bumble along, even in an organization, and just work hard and do what you're told, then you're not bringing your unique perspective, you're not bringing the sum total of your life journey, you're not going to be able to find ways to create value, you're not going to be able to make that unique contribution, and you're not going to be able to make that equation work. And I don't know why it's not taught more, because it's really, for me, it's been the difference that's made in my life. And a number of my peers that I've graduated with from UCT, I believe, are far smarter, more capable, and there's so many people that are smart enough that can do anything, but they don't know what to do. And that is a terrifying outcome of an educational system that hasn't put people in touch with their unique contribution, because then you're just sort of languishing. I want to show you a video of an 11-year-old Serena Williams, and just listen carefully. In it, she's asked what kind of tennis player she would like to be like when she grows up.
If you were to say, who would you think to be like? Well, I never think to be like you.
11 years old, not like other people, but like me. So I find it uncanny that at 11 years old, she was so clear, so clear on her unique contribution. And I'm sure it's played a huge role in where she is today. Your unique contribution and hard work over time creates value that yields success. And I've often questioned myself as to why it was so easy for me to believe this. And to that, I must credit my parents and my upbringing. You see, my parents were born into abject poverty, and they created everything that they have in their lives today. They excelled as professionals, architects, engineers, and had all these side businesses at the same time. And I watched them do all of these things, coming from absolutely nothing. And then at the age of 12, 13, I also watched them lose everything they had ever built. But lo and behold, they picked themselves up and started all over again. So for me, by the time I was 22, I had seen this equation play out twice over. It wasn't an idea, a suggestion, a possibility, a myth. It was one of the only life truths I knew for sure. And that's, I guess, why I was able to trust it sort of so instinctively. I can't underemphasize how important this equation is, that hard work and your unique contribution over time creates value that yields success. It's imperative that every individual actually comes to that realization. And in these very trying socioeconomic times that our country and continent finds itself in, it's even more critical that we have that realization, because something quite tragic happens to your mindset if you haven't arrived at that equation. If you personally do not believe that I, as Rapelang, can create value, you end up believing that value is something that is given through donations, grants, entitlements, free lunches. Or you end up believing that value is taken through aggression, force, theft, corruption. And we don't need to look very far in our country to see how the human mind has imploded, where people who do not believe that there is any other way to arrive at value must give or take. We can't obviously afford these kind of beliefs in our society, and if it's anything you sort of work out with today, it's certainly clarity on this idea that I can create value if I choose to sort of go on this journey of sort of self-discovery, so I can find those things and make a commitment to actually build on those things. So now, like Neo, you also have a choice. You can take the blue pill and pretend you didn't hear anything I said, you didn't understand anything I said, and you can go to sleep tonight and continue your life as you have before. You can take the red pill, and you can decide to follow those questions that you don't necessarily have answers for today. You can follow the red pill and go on that journey of self-discovery and greater self-awareness that could open up some more ideas and thoughts. You can decide to have those more honest conversations with yourself about what you're really doing. You can decide to follow those curiosities that don't seem like much right now, but continue to enter your consciousness time and time again, and acknowledge that they're there and wonder what they teach you about yourself and the world around you. So I'm not saying that this journey is easy at all, and I'm not saying that it will be quick, But if my life has been anything to go by, it has been worthwhile. And if I hadn't tuned into those questions I started asking myself at 14, I wouldn't be able to make the decisions I did at 22 or today at 33. I have simply followed the questions and trusted that they will lead me somewhere. There've been lots of roadblocks and challenges along the way, and while I've received a great many sort of awards and things, those are not the things that actually have provided me the greatest affirmation. I want to tell you a particular story that gives me great comfort and assurance that I'm still living sort of my best life, a question I ask myself repeatedly and very, very, very often. A couple of years ago, I was on a flight from Johannesburg to Gaborone, and it's the small planes that fly there with the propellers outside. And I remember sitting on the wrong seat, and I was told to move around, which is quite unusual because most people don't care on that flight. And I ended up sitting next to a gentleman, and generally I don't talk to people on the plane, I prefer to sleep, but I happened to talk to this guy, and after some time, we exchanged names, and he's like, actually my daughter's called Rapelang. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Haven't met many Rapelangs in my life before. And we talk a bit more, and he says then that, before my 3-year-old daughter was born, my wife and I were really, really struggling for a name. We wanted a Tswana name, we wanted something unusual, and we were battling. And then we watched something on TV, and it was this amazing story about this amazing girl and with this amazing name. And without even looking at each other, we knew that this was the name that we had been waiting for. And he's trying to remember her name, and it's like Rapelang. And I'm thinking that the air pressure in the plane is shutting down. And I'm like, Rapelang Rabana, and he's like, yes. And he does a double take, and I do a double take. And I really, really thought that the plane was about to fall out of the sky. A couple of months later, I met baby Rapelang. Spent many, many hours that afternoon just crying. I'm like wondering, how does this kind of thing happen? How does this work out in this universe? And if anything else, it gave me a sense, that affirmation that I am still walking my life path. I am still making my unique contribution, and I'm on sort of the right road, and to keep pushing despite all the sort of challenges that come our way and frustrations and the fatigue. So I can't tell you exactly what you need to do for your life, because if you've listened carefully, the essence of what I'm saying is that the answers lie within you. And trusting that is about the beginning of the first important step of that journey. Most people are waiting for far too long for external answers and external validation, which will almost never, ever come. I leave you with a quote by Confucius, where he says that when you were born with 2 lives, and your second life begins the day you realize that you only have 1 life. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think what we're going to do now is open up the floor for questions. I'm sure a lot of people have got questions for Rapelang.
Sure. Here's a question, and
can we have another mic?
Indeed, personal mastery makes you to see your potential. I'm honored to see you speak again. I met you in 2015 in Gaborone Job Summit, and I'm very excited to see you again here. My question to you today is, how have you been able to manage your relationships, business relationships, and what challenges have you experienced, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Which business relationships do you mean in particular? It's very broad.
In the people that you work with, the people that you associate with, like you said, you started Yego with your classmates, and how did you manage maybe the conflicts or the differences between you and your colleagues?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very, very important conversation again that probably isn't covered enough. I think most businesses don't end up failing because of product failures. They will fail because of shareholder and partner fallouts. And it's really critical that you align values and expectations quite up front. We were quite naive. We just, got together because we all didn't want to get a job, and therefore this is the default group. And through that process, a couple of years in, it became apparent that we actually had different aspirations. Some of us were in it to make a quick buck this year, and if it's not happening, become very frustrated. Others were in this because we're in it for as long as it takes. And at that point, we needed to make a shift and allow those who needed to move out to move out. And it was incredibly lucky that we managed to survive. Sort of 2 of the original 5 left the business when the second group of investors came in. And most businesses would have died at that point. And going forward now, I'm a lot more careful about what before you bring in an equity partner, are you very clear on what everyone is coming in for? And I encourage you more to either do projects or consulting engagements or short-term things with people before you go into an equity relationship with them, because it's so much harder to separate. There isn't divorce in the simpler sense in equity partnerships, and it can bring your whole business down if there's a partnership fallout. Do some kind of work before together, where you spend time together and done real work, not friend stuff, but real work before you decide to go into an equity partnership with someone.
Hi, Rapelang. I have 2 questions for you. The first one is related to your Kindle learning thing. So you mentioned that you've created a bridge for university, but it's for English proficiency. Being a university student and having gone through first year and having spoken to other first year students, I realized that the gap between high school and university is quite huge. So I just want to know if you are looking into doing more things of that nature, but like maybe in different faculties or in different, skills in terms of just bridging that gap. That's my first question. And secondly, I just want to ask, in deciding what it is that you're going to get into as a person, because we find that now because of the internet and I guess fast connections with people around us, it's so much easier to be interested in so many things and think, actually, I can make an impact there, I can make an impact there. How do you decide what it is that is exactly the thing you should get into? Because you find that you like a lot of things, but maybe they're not all for you. But how do you decide before getting into them that which one is the one? Thank you.
Sure. With the first question, with new projects and businesses, it's always important to start with the lowest hanging fruit. And English proficiency was a clearer challenge. And there's obviously maths literacy and cognitive processing were the sort of the other 2 that we looked at. And at the same time, I'm also trying to answer the question, what can be done well on technology? You can't teach everything online or everything using technology, and I'm really much more focused on where can technology provide an unfair advantage. Otherwise, we might as well stick with what's happening in face-to-face environments. So there's a lot of sort of decision factors in there. If we're not going to be able to create a solution that gives you an unfair advantage, then it's why it's going to be much harder to sort of sell and make sustainable. And it has to work like a service or product that institutions are prepared to sort of pay for. I'm not opposed to expanding into other areas, but when you start looking at other aspects around where learners sort of might have challenges around self-management, self-leadership, discipline, study skills, improving cognitive thinking levels, those are things that I am not sure that technology can solve alone with you looking at a computer as yet. We're doing a lot of research in that space, but I don't know. And until I know, I can't sort of package a product in that. So it's an ongoing sort of journey. And and I do a lot of research on it, and I haven't found an approach that I think could be convincing as yet. So yeah, it's a long haul. The second question in terms of how you decide what you end up doing, because there's so much sort of going on out there. You do certainly live in a much tougher world now with all the external stimulus that you have, which is why that ability of tuning inwards is going to become so much more important. If you're overstimulated, with all these movies, social media, everything else happening to you, you almost forget that you can generate your own thoughts and ideas and things because everything is coming at you. And I just am very deliberate about sort of tuning out and creating the spaces where I can hear myself, and for me that's through running or through meditation. Some people will go to church, some people will hike, some people will do dangerous sports. Who knows, what kind of is your thing, and that's part of the journey of the self-discovery. You've got to do those things that make you feel lighter, more anchored, that help you do that tuning out. And I also have a lot of ideas very often, but a lot of ideas I also forget about very often too. And the things that have stuck around, even with Rekindle Learning, I was already in high school asking myself, every time you got a test back, you would get this test script and you'd see the things you got wrong and you'd tell yourself, I promised myself I'll come back and revise it, and that didn't happen. And there were some things I was lucky enough to get right, and I knew it was a lucky shot, and I knew I should revise it before my exam, but again, that kind of didn't happen. And I remember asking myself even then, surely there should be a system that allowed me to keep track of what I was, struggling with, or concepts I hadn't gotten, so I can focus in on those, something to help me monitor that and just help me redirect my learning to where it's needed most. So I probably thought about that back then. I didn't know it was a business, but it's a thought that has stayed with me. And then I started tutoring students maths here in Gugulethu, and those questions sort of came up again because they would write a test and they often wouldn't get a test script back. They would just see a mark. So they never knew what they got right or wrong. And I was like, there's no feedback loop, so there's no chance of learning. So these thoughts have stayed with me for years and years. And it was those ideas, and when I started the business, it's like, there's a whole lot of things I could do out there, but it's just so much simpler to do something that I actually think about when there's no force, when I'm not being required to, because these are the things I can tune into deeper, and these are the things that I can stick with for years. And if you're honest enough with yourself, you will be able to start separating the fun noise from the things that you have carried with you for many years. And this is what I'm saying, what is the sum total of your life journey? I'll give you an example of a lady. She grew up in a mining town. And being a mining town, many people would have injuries, and there would be lots of people who die, who have injuries, who have broken legs or disabled in some way. And she ended up building a business that produces protective clothing for miners who go underground. And because she had been seeing this her whole life, understanding what was required was intuitive or natural to her. She had a unique perspective that she had carried with her, and she manifested that into a business. So again, one could have said it was a disadvantage to grow up in a small town with not lots of other things to do, but she brought to bear her total life journey. And that's the challenge that sort of each of us has to bring. I'll give you a more modern example. A friend of mine also I was with at UCT, studied marketing, and she went to work at FMCG Goods and sort of Unilever, and she was a brand manager and things like that. And those things were interesting to her, but she was really much more interested in women's fashion and things. And she found a way to bring those two things together. She started a concept called Vintage Swap, where on Saturday afternoons, women bring in their old clothes or used clothes that are still in good condition to resell. So women would swap, or you put it on the line and you buy other things or sell some of your stuff. And because she had built this understanding of brand management with the FMCGs, she knew how to package a proposal to get the magazines, the Lints, all the women's brands to sponsor her events. And it could become a self-sustaining business in its own right. So she used what she had that she wasn't that passionate about to walk towards what her thing was, and she could create a new concept and manifest that. So she brought to bear again her total life journey to create something different and new. But if she hadn't kept asking herself, how do I do this? I'm frustrated. How do I move forward? How do I change? And those questions are hard to keep facing, and you would often just shut them down. She wouldn't have sort of found that place. And you've got to be willing to try. And that's the tough part, really. I hope I've tried to answer. Okay, there was a lady here, but I'm not sure who else is next.
Hi, I'm Cassandra. I'd just like to know, to what extent, so it sounds like you've kind of forged your own life path, particularly because you started a business right out of university, but how important do you think it is when it comes to selling yourself? More as like a brand, or, you know, rather than being humble, how much do you think that's contributed to your success and other people's success? Do you feel like you have to have a bit of a hyperbole, or?
So I was always very reluctant with sort of the selling of self thing. When we started PR with Diego, it was supposed to be sort of for the business, but then the most efficient way to get interviews was to talk about yourself, and then you had inadvertently talk about the business. So it just kind of morphed for me. And because I could, from my years of public speaking and debating, I could speak well, and it just sort of snowballed sort of of its own right. And I hadn't realized what the value of a brand was until, you know, I look back now. I didn't intentionally go out to sort of build it, and it kind of morphed. But now I realize its significant value, so I guess I'm much more deliberate about it, because I realized even with the sort of awards that I've received, people are sitting in a room that I am not there in, have a conversation and decide something. And it is my brand that is there and not me. And that's the power of a brand, that it will speak for you in networks that you are not even in. Whereas networking allows you to gain value from people you meet physically yourself. A brand allows you to build value from people you will probably never meet. And I didn't realize that can be such a huge, huge benefit. And so I look at it as a way to connect to people. And that could lead to conversations around the business, or long-term, I might start another business in 10 years, and that conversation might only sort of be relevant there. So I think it's critical now, but I wouldn't start with selling myself. I would start with doing something, and we built something that was worth talking about. Whereas some young people, you know, I want to just start talking and being a public speaker, and what about, really? And you've got to build an expertise in something that will give you the gravitas. And I think that's been pretty critical for me, because we built a product like that, and because we went to market and we were doing something, then people want to hear you talk. And it must start the other way around for it to be credible and sustainable. Then it's not a bad thing. But if it is the thing, then you've got a problem. Yeah. Hi.
Okay. Hello?
Hi.
I've got two questions. I'm doing the same degree as you, Business Science, Computer Science. What aspects of your degree did you find most useful in your journey? And the second one is, while you were going through your slides, I actually got a few ideas. And I wanted to know, where do you go from there once you have these ideas?
Sure. So the first question, what I think is important about an undergrad degree is that it teaches you how to learn. And find the discipline to push through things that, even if you don't find them sort of that interesting, and that's an important ability to have for the rest of your life. You don't actually have to study or apply the things in your undergrad for the rest of your life at all. Even the computer science elements, most of the programming we learned then wasn't what we used in building our products, but we had learned how to learn a programming language, and that's what kind of mattered. I was just chatting to Terry, who did one of our courses for what's called New Venture Planning in our computer science course, and I was saying that was probably one of the most practical modules that we had, because we were actually forced to write a business plan sort of end to end. And that obviously helped me the following year when I was trying to do these business plans to get funding. I wouldn't be too concerned, though, if you don't believe your degree is directly relevant to what you have. You should be able to get on Google or an online course somewhere and learn the missing gaps of what you might need to do. The first degree is just to prove that you can learn, sort of from my perspective. Then your other question in terms of ideas of where to move on. Again, it's very important to, well, the first thing is see if those ideas and curiosity to explore it is still there next week. That's an important one, and if it is, then it's pretty simple to start exploring something. I mean, whenever I find something interesting, I try to look for the best books around that topic. So at the moment, I'm researching a lot on how you build leadership mindsets, how you shift mindsets from dependent mindsets to independent sort of mindsets, and I'm reading a few good books on that sort of a month to try and understand how that's the most articulate way of explaining how that happens. And then eventually, maybe once I've read enough books, I might find a framework that could work. And then maybe I might try it out in a class or something. And then maybe if that works, I might think, actually, if you put technology into these steps, I might be able to build a product about it. But it's a series of tiny little steps and curiosities and conversations that I'll have with myself over a period of time before it kind of materializes into anything, which is why it can't just be something that is cute and interesting. Is it something that you really care about? Otherwise, you can read about it for today and then forget about it, but it's not going to be something that you can direct yourself towards. And you've got to find that thing that digs deeper than just being a mental curiosity that won't carry you sort of very far. And university is great for that, because I think that one of the most important things that you need to do here is to explore and have these experiences and have this exposure. You might find that point of stimulus that is deeper than everything else. But if you're not engaging, and if you're closed off, and if you're insular, you're not giving your mind the opportunities to be stimulated. And over time, you start to pull more towards one thing than the other. It's pretty organic. There isn't, I don't have a formula for it, but if you're not aware, if you're not reflecting on what am I more interested in, if I'm not reflecting on, actually, first year I like this a lot, and fourth year I'm still into this, maybe this is something. If you're not asking yourself those questions, then you're going to miss the messages. So that's why that internal conversation is so important. Take as many little steps as possible to explore ideas, and then it'll become apparent if it's something that genuinely interests you or not.
Hi, Rapelang.
Hi.
I'm studying at UCT, and my business is also in education.
Cool.
And the question I have for you today is twofold. One, how different would your journey have been if you had pursued your entrepreneurial passion whilst you were still studying? And what advice would you give to those of us who are doing both at the same time?
Bold people, sure. I really can't be sure if it would have been good or bad. It wasn't going to be right for me, and that's sort of the only thing I can say, but it doesn't mean that it's good or bad. I certainly wasn't ready at that point emotionally to undertake that. I just wanted to get past this thing so I could get out of the system and then finally kind of do what I wanted to do. If you can still get through your studies, hey, push it through. I can't imagine that it must be a bad thing. And you could use your time at university to get access to more minds and feedback, and to test things out more. And you won't be as pressured to make things happen quickly because you're busy with other things, whereas once this is your baby and this is your business, every day is slow because you need something to move, and business actually takes a long time to kind of materialize. So there might be some advantages in that respect, in that it allows you to be more patient, and you can use the academic or mental resources around you at university to help you flesh that idea out more. What was your second question?
You kind of covered it. It was just what advice would you have to those people who
pursuing both.
exploit while studying at the same time?
I would definitely check what the implications are of the ownership of the IP while you're at school and using university equipment to develop your ideas. definitely got a lot stricter, and you don't want issues with that when you start and you leave the university, and part of that belongs to the university. The only other thing is look for the courses that are more focused on entrepreneurial things, even if they are electives. I think when I did MVP, it was an elective, for example. You use those opportunities so that it gives you more hands-on practical input on what you could do in your business, and don't just stick to your core degree program. Find those electives that you can slip in that actually get much more focused on your business idea. That would be a great use of time. And then meet a lot of the guest lecturers that come to the campus that are in any way related to that industry that you want to get involved in, and hear what they say and start having conversations and building relationships with them. So yeah, and I hope there's still a lot of people that come and speak on campus, but those are the prime opportunities to get some industry insights.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. So I wanted to ask what the fundamentals of innovation are. And I wanted to ask this because, for example, I'm a bioengineer, I'm in science, and we use this word innovation all the time because we're scientists, we build things, we change the world. But if you look at the reality of science right now, it's not really having as much of an impact as it should be having on Africa, despite the fact that we're so innovative. And from personal experience, for example, I found that just because something, for example, is a need, doesn't necessarily think that your customer doesn't necessarily see it as a want. So sometimes people so often go about creating these products and things that are innovative because they're different and they do cater to a need, but the actual consumer, for example, doesn't want it. And that's where you realize that innovation is something that's beyond just being a scientist or creating new things. So what really is an innovator?
Interesting one. So I think I would say that I see innovation as the ability to solve a problem in a way that someone will pay for it. I'm not an advocate of, because I believe that if you're going to build anything that's going to be great or sustainable, it has to be able to, if you're going to be able to build anything that is great and scalable, it has to be sustainable, it has to be profitable. And so I would say that I've sort of touched on how, the innovation things might start with solving these needs and problems that you might sort of see around you. But the problem you just explained now, where, someone won't pay for it or people don't take it up, it means you haven't zeroed in deep enough on the need, or you haven't found the markets that will pay for it. So, for example, I was on a board of a sort of another organization where they are building medical-based applications to help people in rural communities better diagnose diabetes and other chronic illnesses and things like that. And they're not sure how it will ever be sustainable because our target markets can't pay for it and things. And I was thinking, well, let's take a step back and look at the whole ecosystem. Who are the people with money in the medical healthcare ecosystem? It's the pharmaceuticals, it's some of government, and I don't know enough about the industry, but take a step back and who else has money sort of in this ecosystem? And I was like, well, if it's the pharmaceuticals, then are you gathering the kind of data that would be useful to them? Are you gathering the kind of data in this app, in these diagnostic conversations that someone like them would be willing to pay for? And if you aren't, maybe that is the iteration that you kind of need to do to make it a viable sort of proposition. And then maybe part of it is that you're able to offer medications, or maybe part of the solution is you're able to tell them where this medication is. What you've described is that you haven't solved the full problem. Either telling someone that they've got whatever stage 2 diabetes doesn't mean enough for them, so they're not going to pay for it. It means that you haven't solved the whole problem. Maybe you need to tell them, this is where you buy the medication, this is how much it costs, this is the healthcare government medical plan, and if you do this, it'll save you X amount. Then you're solving a holistic problem, and then you've got someone someone else's interest. Whereas it sounds like someone might just have built something that was cute and interesting, but they haven't understood the breadth of it. And again, I would say, how deeply involved are you in the problem to really have all the insights to package that right solution? You might well be too far away to understand how to solve it sort of deep enough. And again, this is why it comes back to authentic connection and your depth of understanding. The deeper your understanding is, the more holistic outlook sort of you can have about how you tackle sort of this challenge. And if you're not, you need to sort of get deeper or get more real. You get your hands dirtier. You're too far away. Sure, who's next?
We're going to take a few more questions.
Okay.
But during the networking phase, you're very welcome. Rapelang is going to be here for a little while, and you're very welcome to ask her questions one-on-one. Okay. We're going to take maybe a handful of more questions, maybe 5 more questions, 6. And then we will ask you to direct your questions to Rapelang outside. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, I have a comment and a question.
Yes.
So we live in the real world of connecting the dots in South Africa. Our previous finance minister was very fond of saying connect the dots. And in your opening remarks, you said that South Africa has an environment of potential entrepreneurship, but that's from an index point of view. But that hasn't materialized. On the other hand, you mentioned that we also have good policies. So, I mean, we all realize that we have excellent policies and we have excellent potential. So my only comment was that your talk today, you actually had the wrong venue. You should have been at Nasrec at the policy conference. Not quite here.
I needed you to get me in.
Yeah. So a related question to that, in terms of entrepreneurship and technology, within the continent, we are being leapfrogged by most of East Africa, and even a country like Rwanda, which is far more digitally connected than South Africa is. Within South Africa, the question I have, do you think we are being digitally colonized?
Sure. Are we being digitally colonized? To a certain extent, yes. Most of the content that we have online is not generated from here. We are consuming Western content in general. And the solutions that make the most money in this country are, by and large, Western. However, I think that part of the challenges has been that in the marketplace, we haven't seen the manifestation of our local perspectives. The products that have been created by someone who has lived in this context would have been different to what is sort of here. And this is why I keep coming back to, how do you see the world? We're not seeing the solutions that stem from what people in this room, how they see the world come into sort of reality, because of these things that come from the West that look perfect and seem fine and have lots of other money. We almost have pushed aside how would we see the world and what would we create from our perspective. And that's the only way we avoid that colonization, by stamping our perspective onto the world, as opposed to allowing these external perspectives to be stamped and realized in sort of our world. And that has to stem from a place where you believe that this perspective is legitimate and valid. Otherwise, you'll have to keep consuming other people's. And to that extent, we are being colonized because we haven't quite put our weight behind our perspectives in that way. And not that it's not impossible. Like you said, Kenya and Rwanda are starting, and we can still go a long, long way in that. I worry a lot more about the people mindset here than in the rest of Africa. We are not we're not trusting our perspective and believing that it has some value to be delivered.
Dumelama?
Yes, hi.
How did you start? I mean, when you first left university and you guys started up your first business, or rather, not how did you start, but how would you start looking back now? For instance, as a young tech startup company, ed tech company, we're struggling to figure out if we should focus more on developing a product or developing a business model or building relationships with organizations that we need to be linked with to run successfully. So what is the first place to start off with?
Sure. So I did it differently with both businesses. With Diego, we spent a heck of a lot of time and money in R&D before we really started engaging with the market and clients and things like that, because we had come out of the world perspective that said you need to get funding, you need to build a whole new thing, and then you sort of go to market. And with Rekindle Learning, I didn't want to take that approach. I wanted to get into the market first, especially because learning tech was a lot more nascent. So I avoided the high capex cost by white labeling an existing solution. I founded another university overseas that had no presence here. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I really wanted, but it was pretty close enough. And that allowed me to go and see customers immediately, see what the perspective is and what they would be willing to pay for, and get some real engagement with customers. And through those relationships, after 2 years or so, I started to see that actually this is the gap in learning that I could focus on. And that's when we started building the English proficiency one. But I wouldn't have thought of that sort of at the beginning because I wasn't in the market. I wasn't engaging with customers. I wasn't engaging with stakeholders. So it's very easy when you're in the tech space to fall in love with the sexiness of your whole new product that you're going to develop, and it's going to be slicker and smoother than anything else you've seen out there, but nobody cares. And you should rather talk to customers and get a real sense of what the deeper need is. So it's coming back to her question later. You might have a sense of what the problem is, but until you're really, really in there and you're deploying a product, then you're going to hit the real challenges. And you may well find that you might be too far ahead and you want to take a step back and solve a simpler problem first, which may well be cheaper and quicker and make you more money, or it'll just be you'll find another problem related that people are actually prepared to pay for. You might still eventually get to what you imagined, but it'll just be in a sort of a different way because you've understood the real need much, much deeper, and you've followed the money. Where will it come from and who will pay for it? So get into the market if you can. If you can do a very simple MVP, or you can customize or repackage something that's existing, get into the market, and then only after a few months, then, or a year, plan, this is what the beautiful big product is going to look like once you've got sort of market feedback. Yeah.
We're going to take 2 questions on that side and the final 2 on this side.
Okay.
Hi. Okay, cool. Hi, Rapelang.
Hi.
I have a question. I'm currently a computer engineering student, and I have aspirations of growing my business one day. But personally, what have you done to grow your personal leadership skills before or while growing your business? It must be hard just starting from nothing to something. So apart from what you know intellectually of how to build it, or the knowledge you learned from school, what did you do as a person to grow your internal leadership skills so you can grow it to the point where it is right now?
Sure. So obviously, that's very, very critical, and part of why I covered what I covered in my talk today is because it's not your academic, your accounting knowledge or marketing knowledge that's going to be able to take you sort of the whole way. Your ability to lead yourself is a huge contributor to how well you might be able to build a business or not. So I've been, other than these crazy conversations I have with myself in my head and the continuous sort of self-reflection, I have always sought, especially sort of from the 3rd or 4th year into business, coaches, mentors, therapists. I create as many feedback loops around me as possible. People that are prepared to hold the mirror against anything sort of that's happening and that I'm doing, and who can prompt me to ask questions that I wouldn't have been able to ask myself, and force me to ask myself, what have I learned about myself from how I responded to this situation? And is it something that I want to change, can change? And if I don't, how does it sort of affect my business? And creating those feedback loops of people, so as professionals, but also with the quality of friends that you surround yourself with. Do you have conversations with friends that you actually have honest conversations about? My parents and family is one of the most, frank families I come from, and everyone, puts everything out there, and you can talk about everyone's crap, and because we believe you'll learn from it and you'll grow for it, and that's the most important thing. And that, I think, is the most crucial thing that develops you as a leader, your ability to do that continuous self-reflection. Otherwise, and even when I hire people today, it's, if you're smart, okay, cool, but I much more look out for occasions where you stop and think and listen and ask questions, because that will determine how fast you will improve and grow. If you're the kind of person who just does an assignment, I've submitted it, don't care. Everything else, it just switches off. You're not going to learn from you're not going to learn from the experience as much as someone who will reflect on what the lecturer said. Why did they think that way? Why am I upset they said that? What does it tell me about that? That person is the one that will grow much, much faster in the 5 years than the one who started out smarter by marks or anything like that. So again, it's the willingness to have honest conversations.
Hi, Rapelang.
Hi.
I hope you're well. As a startup myself, I have my own business, but I also work full-time. And what I want to ask is, what are the calculated risks that if I want to go full-time in my business, because I feel like I spend too much time at work and less time on my business, but I want to go full-time. So what are the things that I need to consider before going full-time in my business?
It's not easy not knowing sort of what the business is, because I think it does depend on the industry. But what I would suggest, the ideal outcome is to be able to secure a stable enough income or stable enough revenue in your business that would at least be able to cover some or part of your salary so that you don't get stuck. The worst situation is when you sort of stopped working now and then the business isn't giving you any money and you're now under pressure to sort of stay alive. And that's when you make desperate decisions and often the wrong sort of decisions. And you might find that if the business is only generating a small amount of revenue now, maybe it's ideal to hire an administrative or operational person as opposed to you. Maybe someone who's also studying, or an intern or something like that, to be able to do some of the groundwork or mundane stuff that you don't have to be the one to do. And you can still stay in whatever sort of job or thing that you're at until the business sort of grows better. So it doesn't have to be you. And often as an entrepreneur, you imagine that it has to be you. If you have designed the right sort of systems and processes on how to oversee them, then it doesn't actually have to be you. There's so many cheap virtual resources that you can hire on the internet now to get through a lot of the mundane admin of sort of running a business, and you might want to sort of explore those more. The other thing I would look at is, be sure when try to get to a point where you are sure that it's not just a cute idea, but there is good feedback from customers that you believe that it can now sort of scale. So use this time to really test the waters, talk to companies or potential clients as much as possible. And often I remember even myself, because I'm not really a salesperson, I would avoid talking to the people that I thought would have the harshest criticism. Now I want to talk to them first because I want to know what the worst is, see if I can fix it. And if not, then maybe that's a sign that I need to shift and change the business a lot. So use this time when you are not financially and as emotionally vested as you are, to explore the tougher aspects of the business. So often, I think a lot of the time when you are full-time in a business, you are so committed to seeing it as successful, as seeing it as okay. You don't want to see the sort of bad bits. And when you're in your position now, where you're in it but not in it, you're more emotionally, it's not as painful to look at the bad sides of the business, so that might need to improve, and use this time of that having that emotional independence to have the tougher conversations or with the toughest possible clients that you might have had, so that you get that feedback right now and help you to sort of refine the business better. Yeah, that's all I can suggest.
Hello, Rabana.
Hi.
when a person speaks about innovation, it's in tech, it's usually rather around software and hardly ever with hardware. I guess it could be attributed to, like, it's less capital intensive, it's easier really to start up. Do you think that there's still space for innovation in hardware? And what are some of the reasons why people just don't really go into that space? And what are the chances of a product or a new product or an innovative product rather in hardware being scalable?
So if you refer back to how I sort of defined innovation before, it was solving a problem in a way that someone is prepared to pay for it. And for me, that doesn't have to be software technology at all. It doesn't have to be engineering related at all. So certainly, yes, you can be innovative in the hardware space. And my sense of why there's less activity in that sort of hardware space is largely because it's more expensive to go and build something in there. Whereas with software, all you needed was a cheap laptop and some internet, and you could sort of get going. And that's why it probably has a disproportionate sort of focus. But it doesn't mean that there isn't innovation to be achieved in the hardware space. I certainly believe there is. I just don't know enough about it myself. So I can't begin to think where the angles might be, but don't think for 1 second that there isn't something new that can be done in that sector at all. I mean, the Kenyans launched that brick internet sort of device because they needed an internet kind of modem that was really robust, that won't break when you drop it and can work in the most rural sort of settings, because our normal internet modems were not robust enough for those environments. And that was very much a hardware innovation. And again, observed from their real life experience, the problems they had seen their whole lives, they were able to do that kind of hardware innovation. I still think there's significant innovation to be done on phone batteries. They can't be dying like they're dying now, and the people that figure that out have significant upside. So I really, really don't think we're at the end of hardware innovation at all.
Hi, Rapelang. I think I've got the last question.
Yay!
First of all, I just wanted to say you'll be very pleased to know that the PCU NVP integration is now compulsory.
Oh, excellent.
For all the computer science students. Still a small group of students on the campus, but it's a start. And then my question was sort of brought up by the other gentleman who mentioned that word, colonized. And of course, we're in this period of decolonized education. Have you had any pushback in terms of privileging English, in terms of the learning?
The English program.
Yeah, and filling the gap in for university students, but with that, multilingual campus, and then, but you're going for the English.
Yes, I've definitely heard it, and I'm expecting a lot more of it. I'm not against vernacular languages at all. Certainly, there's a lot of evidence that going in, especially at primary school education, to have it significantly improves your cognitive processing abilities in the long term. I'm simply providing the solution from the standpoint that at a tertiary level, you are now coming into a global market. This is not about South Africa and its languages and us having to assert some cultural dominance over anything. You're in a global landscape and you must compete on an international benchmark. And that's going to require a global language, whether it's English or Mandarin or what have you. And I'm trying to set people up for that. And I don't know how effective teaching in vernacular language is going to help you when you're going to have to enter a commercial industry or medical industry or whatever else is that is sort of run in English. So I think the conversation for vernacular languages for me happens much earlier in the education cycle. I don't see the merit at the tertiary level to pursue that agenda when you need to be preparing for professional entry at this point. That said, we've tried to decolonize our content. It's got African writers, it's talking about African stories, African role models, and that's sort of as far as we can try to do when we're still dealing with the English language.
Thank you, Rapelang. But before I get to thanking Rapelang officially and formally and nicely, I just wanted to tell everybody that June was Entrepreneurship Month, and so in looking for a speaker, it was not by chance that we happened upon Rapelang. We wanted obviously somebody dynamic who's already in that space, who can share with us her journey to success. And as part 2 of today's event, we're inviting all of you to join us at the GSB's Entrepreneurship Village. We're making transport available on the 15th of July to take interested alumni, students, staff to that site. I don't know if many of you know about that initiative. Basically, it is a multi-purpose entrepreneurial development space. When you come to that event on the 15th, you will get to meet real-life entrepreneurs who come from Philippi and surrounding areas. They'll talk to you about how they've been supported by the University of Cape Town, what they do. It's going to be a very interactive session, so I want to encourage as many of you as possible to sign up. We'll be issuing the invitation to all of you during the week. It will probably be on a first-come, first-served basis, but please do sign up for that. And now to the thank you. Thank you to our distinguished speaker this afternoon. Thank you for such an inspiring talk. You are an inspiration. You are, you're everything. And we want to thank you for taking the time to join us today and to share your journey to success, but also your lessons about entrepreneurship and innovation. And as a small token of our appreciation, we'd like to, on behalf of the University of Cape Town, present you with a small gift.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.